app and CBCNews.ca. We're standing by as we do each day at this time to bring you the Prime Minister's daily pandemic briefing. But of course, this is not like any other day. Across Nova Scotia, right across this country, Canadians are trying to come to terms with an unimaginable crime, a mass shooting that happened over the weekend. A gunman killed at least, we are hearing, 16 people. We're learning more about the victims today, their names, their stories. An RCMP constable, a grade school teacher, correctional officers, a volunteer firefighter, and a nurse are among the dead. The RCMP is expected to give us an update in about 2 hours at 2 p.m. local time in Nova Scotia, and we will of course expect the Prime Minister to address this today as well. But because of the nature of this story, how important it is, we will start today in Nova Scotia, and then we'll get to my colleagues here in Ottawa. Brett Ruskin and Tom Murphy join us both. Brett is in Portapique, which is where this all began, and we'll get some community reaction from him in a moment, but we'll start with Tom in Halifax for the latest on what we know. Tom.
Yeah, really trying to piece it together. We're expecting an RCMP briefing in a couple of hours now to help shed more light on what happened, but we are hearing of more victims. The count is now up to 17, including the killer. You mentioned some of the occupations of some of those people. Just devastating. I mean, people woke up this morning in Nova Scotia. I know I did. I wondered, was this a dream? Is this going to be over soon or not? Of course, a lot of people feeling the same way. There's a real pall over the province right now, and yet people are trying not to let this define them, saying they're going to help people, families who are feeling the pain right now, and give them a virtual hug if they can. The RCMP has been pretty scant with the details. They are still trying to piece together the crime scenes, and there are multiple crime scenes across Nova Scotia, which is making it very complicated. We do know that there were house fires in Portapique, where Brett is. There was also a house fire in Wentworth today. That is just north of the Portapique area, and we learned today that 3 people actually died in that location. So little bits and pieces like that are starting to come through, and we're of course also learning more about the personalities and the people behind some of the deadly stats here.
What do we know more about the suspected shooter, who is also dead, as you rightly point out, Tom? What more do we know about him and his interactions or connections to the community?
Yeah, he's a bit of a mystery, really. I mean, people in his community of Portapique, where he owned a property and lived, and in the Dartmouth area of Halifax here, where he had a denturist shop, quite liked the guy. They thought he was very professional. He made them feel good about themselves when they went there to get denture work done for him. They felt he was a good community person. But there's the other side of him that's being exposed now for sure. I mean, this is a man who had a penchant for old police cars. He used to buy them as kind of a hobby and fix them up. He had one that looked very much like an existing RCMP police car. It was indeed a fake, but he was driving it yesterday. He also had RCMP clothing. So all of these things point to a premeditation, as the RCMP investigators and the officials were saying yesterday. But in terms of what motivated him, why he did this, that question is still largely unanswered at this point.
And as we learn more about the shooter, we're obviously learning more about the victims too. I talked about some of their professions, and of course we know an RCMP veteran constable, Heidi Stevenson, was also killed. What more do we know about some of the other people who lost their lives?
Yeah, well, Heidi Stevenson was a 23-year veteran of the RCMP, and by all accounts, just a fantastic RCMP officer. She was, at least at one point, the face of the RCMP in this province. She would do interviews for the RCMP, so some people in the media know her, and I know there has been some reaction coming in about how important she was in so many people's lives in this province and in other parts of the country as well. We know that 3 of the people who died in the fire in Wentworth, at least one of those was a corrections officer, if I understand correctly. So that is that's a loss that that community, that professional community, is feeling obviously as well. 2 Victoria Order of Nurses staff members who were busy helping in the COVID-19 fight, they died as well. And then of course Lisa McCulley, who is the school teacher from Portapique, who has died as well and has left behind a family as well.
Okay, Tom Murphy, thank you for that. Let me turn now to Brett Ruskin, who is in Portapique, where all of this started late on Saturday night. It's such a small community. I know, Brett. How are people dealing with things today as they start to understand the magnitude of what happened?
Well, a small community indeed, and this is kind of the police checkpoint that is now set up here. Only residents being allowed in and out. Obviously, investigators going in to begin the process of piecing together what happened at this scene, but also at scenes, as you heard Tom say, all across this province. Now, community members here are saying that, you know, this really proves that this type of thing could happen anywhere if it were to happen here, because this is a quiet, not even a community, just a neighborhood, about 100 residents down this road, a few dozen homes, and they said that nothing really happens here, certainly not the types of things that we have been seeing over the last 24 hours with police cars zooming around in and out with SWAT team type officers with large guns drawn, with huge structures ablaze in the middle of the night. This is not something that you would typically expect here in this community. As for the other communities that we have seen, Wentworth, like we saw, Glenholm, Debert, Shubenacadie, these are towns that are in some cases rural communities, kind of farmland. You could pick them up and drop them anywhere in the country and they would fit in. They're just small towns, tight-knit communities. Everyone knows everyone. And one other note about the communities here, police put out a notice in the middle of this this emergency with the risk of an active shooter in the area, saying stay home, lock your doors, stay in the basement if you can. Many people that I spoke with today said we never lock our doors ever. So this certainly has taken this community by shock here.
Okay. Brett and Tom, I'm going to leave it there for now, but we will, of course, come back to you through the day for your ongoing coverage. Appreciate it. The CBC's Brett Ruskin in Portapique and Tom Murphy there in Halifax. As Brett mentioned, the investigation is spanning over at least 50 kilometers, so that RCMP briefing we are expecting this afternoon will be an important one. The Prime Minister is expected to give his daily briefing outside Rideau Cottage at around 8 minutes' time or so, but we do expect him to spend a lot of time talking about what happened in Nova Scotia, given the magnitude of the tragedy. I do want to show viewers, if I can, inside the House of Commons, and that's where I'll bring in my colleagues, the host of Power and Politics, Vashi Kapelis, and the CBC's David Cochrane, because in the midst of all of this is the fact that the House of Commons seems to have returned because there was no agreement, primarily between four of the parties and the Conservatives, to do something different. So this is also something that is preoccupying Ottawa right now. Vashi, what's the latest we know on that?
The latest that I'm hearing is that there will be a motion introduced by the Liberals, and the nature of the tension, I should just say, I guess, is that over how many times they should be meeting. The Liberals are offering once a week in person and then some sort of virtual supplemental sessions. The NDP and the Bloc Québécois are supportive of that in various forms, and the Conservatives are arguing for more in-person sessions with a reduced number of MPs there. Right now, my understanding is the Liberals will introduce a motion sort of with that plan in mind, the one that the rest of the parties somewhat agreed to, and they will debate it. Maybe it might take up most of the day, and then there will eventually be some kind of vote on it. All of that is obviously subject to change, as you have been reporting all weekend, Rosie. It's kind of fluctuated minute by minute, hour by hour, but obviously all also set against the backdrop of everything that you've just been talking about. Difficult to, I guess, see, the sort of benefits of all this arguing right now. I think that, expect some sort of agreement at some point between at least most of the parties. Not sure this will continue, much beyond that, but who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it does in light of the pandemic, which we continue to cover, obviously, that's, affecting the entire country. And now the killing of 16 people in a mass shooting in Nova Scotia. It becomes a little difficult, I think, for politicians in moments like these. It's not that it's not important to have accountability and be inside the House. It's that in light of other things that are happening, the arguments are perhaps a little more difficult to make. David, your perspective?
Yeah, it's been interesting. Andrew Scheer has been like a auctioneer going in reverse on this. He wanted 4 days a week, then 3 days a week, then 2 days a week, and now it appears he's going to settle on 1 day a week, supplemented by virtual sittings, where you can do question period over Zoom or some other sort of social distancing technology. That has been the compromise that four of the parties have more or less agreed to. The Greens and the Bloc don't really want any sessions at all unless you have to have a vote, but the Bloc is content to negotiate some sort of rule rules of engagement so that they don't have to go through this every single time Parliament has to come back. Yves-François Blanchet accusing Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives of sort of holding Parliament hostage here. Leading to a fairly typical partisan back and forth between the Conservative leader and the Bloc leader today in atypical times. So while there's an obsession here about the numbers of sittings and the numbers of hours of question periods, I think the country might be worried about other numbers like 35,000 cases, 1,600 deaths due to COVID-19 and 16 murders in Nova Scotia. 16 families who, because of the times we're in, Rosie, no funerals, no wakes, no vigils. Certainly the sort of tragedy where the Prime Minister and other federal dignitaries would travel to Nova Scotia for ceremonies and to offer comfort to people in a time like this. And none of those things can happen because of what's going on. So it becomes very difficult to make, I think, an argument that politics, as usual, to as much as you can, needs to continue in Parliament with as many as 3 sittings a week. I mean, Andrew Scheer said earlier that if MPs can go into a grocery store, they can certainly come here. But what are we told about grocery stores? Go once a week and only one person. Minimize it as much as you can. And you don't have to get on a plane from Vancouver Island to get to Ottawa to buy your groceries, which is essentially what some of the MPs are being asked. So this has evolved over the last several days to 121 Conservatives on one side and 217 MPs from all the other parties on the other side. And it looks like that majority is going to get its way with the motion that is going to be presented and voted on at some point today.
I will say I did go to bed last night thinking that they would reach an agreement in light of some of the things that you've both mentioned, the times we're in, the gravity of some of the things that Canadians are dealing with right now. That doesn't appear to have happened. I will also say I don't think there's any question that everyone, all the parties, believe that Parliament should have some role to play, that there should be some attempt to be able to hold the government to account and answer some questions. And certainly that is a vital part of our democracy. It's just on a day like today, to see it, quibbling about the hours and the times, it becomes, I think, a little bit difficult to talk about the importance of that. And there is real importance to it. It's a legitimate concern. But today it becomes a more difficult time to make those partisan reflections. Vashi, I'll get you to weigh in as we continue to wait for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I think, at the heart of all of this is like you point out and like David points out, a desire for accountability. And there's evidence that accountability has worked over the past month, right? There's lots of legislation that the government has introduced that had some holes in it, that the opposition parties pointed out. They went back, they found a way to reach an agreement. I think the disagreement is over to what degree that accountability should be in person. There are some MPs saying, for example, that they don't want anything in person. They don't necessarily feel safe. There are others saying that it should even be more MPs than should be there now. I think you and David hit on it. I think it's hard for people sitting at home right now who are watching the horror in Nova Scotia unfold, who are living the sort of ongoing tragedy of COVID-19 to, be so interested in the outcome of this. I think there is a need for accountability. I would never disagree with that, especially as a journalist. The contention from the Conservatives is, look, the Prime Minister's going out, he's answering questions from the media every day. Should he not be in the House? Why isn't he getting those questions or open to receiving those questions from the opposition? It sounds like what was being proposed was a bit different than what's normal. So there'd be a few hours in person of just accountability. And then there is a genuine question mark over how this virtual kind of thing would go, if it would be effective, if it would work. Technically, we've seen examples right across the country of things not working. So I think there are genuine questions there as well. But like you, Rosie, you would have thought much of this could have occurred through negotiations behind the scenes. Instead, we're going to see it play out in the House of Commons today. Maybe there'll be an agreement by the end of the day. Maybe they'll vote on it. We'll see. But certainly maybe not the first thing on people's minds right now.
No, I think that's fair to say. And I agree with all of your points, I must say. I do think we will see if the Prime Minister, too, is asked about it and whether there's any sign from him, whether we are getting closer to a deal. There is obviously a necessity for politics and politicians to be playing their important roles right now. But how that looks and what that looks like, I guess, is still being worked out as we stand by to wait for the Prime Minister on his daily briefing, which is usually his government's response to the COVID-19 COVID-19 pandemic. Today, we are told it will be about around what happened in Nova Scotia. Not surprisingly, he did address it yesterday, very briefly, just offering his thanks to first responders and people for following instructions. But at that time, the scale of what had happened was not well understood, and the RCMP had not really confirmed the number of deaths, nor had they confirmed that one of their own had fallen. So there will be other things for the Prime Minister to say today. And we are expecting, of course, to hear from Public Safety Minister Bill Blair a little bit later, as well as, of course, as the Nova Scotia RCMP. Just to remind you what we are dealing with now in terms of numbers, in terms of what happened in Nova Scotia. It started to unfold Saturday night, and the shooter now believed to have taken out at least 16 people, and he himself was also killed when he was taken into custody, is our understanding. Yes. So let me go back to David, if I can. Obviously, these are difficult. Oh, here he is. Here's the Prime Minister. So there we go. We will let him talk about events as they unfolded in Nova Scotia.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Good morning, everyone.
We are a country that stands united in our effort to defeat a pandemic, to save lives, and to help each other make it to a better day. But yesterday, we were jolted from that common cause by the senseless violence and tragedy in Nova Scotia. A gunman claimed the lives of at least 18 people. Among them, a woman in uniform, whose job it is to protect lives even if it endangers her own, Constable Heidi Stevenson of the RCMP. Constable Stevenson died protecting others. She was answering the call of duty, something she had done every day when she went to work for 23 years. This happened in small towns. Portapique, Truro, Milford, and Enfield are places where people have deep roots, places where people know their neighbors and look out for one another. There, everyone knows a Mountie because they're everything from police officers to social workers to teen counselors. Now these communities are in mourning, and Canada is in mourning with them. To the grandparent who lost a child, to the children who lost a parent, to the neighbor who lost a friend, we are so sorry for your loss. Such a tragedy should have never occurred. Violence of any kind has no place in Canada. We stand with you, and we grieve with you, and you can count on our government's full support during this incredibly painful time.
Yesterday, at least 18 people lost their lives after a shootout in Nova Scotia, plunging families and their loved ones in mourning. Some lost children, some lost a parent, some lost a friend. Our thoughts and the thoughts of all Canadians are with you. Such a tragedy should never have occurred. There is no place for violence in our country. We share you in your mourning, and we stand with you and mourn with you as you go through these very painful times.
Full and speedy recovery to all those injured, including another RCMP officer. Canada is a vast and sweeping country filled with long stretches of lonely roads. With unwavering courage and compassion, our Royal Canadian Mounted Police patrol these roads to keep us safe, as they have for over 100 years. I know that from coast to coast to coast, the women and men who wear the red serge in service to Canada are grieving deeply the loss of one of their own and one of our best. This tragedy is a painful reminder of the risks all of our first responders take to keep us safe, of the sacrifices they make every single day to protect our communities. Paramedics, doctors, nurses, firefighters, and police officers. They're always here for us. They've been stepping up through the pandemic, and yesterday in Nova Scotia, they showed that bravery. I want to take a moment to thank them all for their professionalism and their courage. Many of you are already working overtime because of this pandemic. Our communities need you now more than ever, and I know that can weigh on you at times. These are exceptional circumstances, yet you did what you always do. You ran towards danger. Without pause, without hesitation, you put your life on the line. On behalf of all Canadians, thank you for your service.
I'd just like to take a moment to thank all our first responders for their courage and their professionalism. You are already working very hard because of the pandemic. More than ever, we need you. And sometimes that must seem to be a very heavy responsibility and burden on your shoulders. Despite these exceptional circumstances, you have done what you're used to doing. You did not hesitate to risk your own lives to save others. On behalf of all Canadians, thank you for everything you're doing.
This day is made all the more difficult because of the precious lives lost and the senseless act of one person. Just how could this happen? We may never know why. But we do know this. No one man's action can build a wall between us and a better day, no matter how evil, how thoughtless, or how destructive. Canadians are kind and generous. We are there for each other and we look out for one another. As families grieve the loss of a loved one, all Canadians are standing with them. The pandemic will prevent us from mourning together in person, but a vigil will be held virtually to celebrate the lives of the victims at 7 p.m. on Friday through the Facebook group Colchester Supporting Our Community. As we learn more about what happened yesterday, it's important that we come together to support communities. In the hours since the tragedy, I've spoken with Premier McNeil, RCMP Commissioner Lucky, Minister Blair, and many Nova Scotians, including our Nova Scotia caucus. We will continue to work together to see this through. I know that people have a lot of questions. This is an ongoing investigation, but I can assure you that the RCMP and local authorities will keep you updated. I want to ask the media to avoid mentioning the name and showing the picture of the person involved. Do not give him the gift of infamy. Let us instead focus all our intention and attention on the lives we lost and the families and friends who grieve.
While the pandemic will prevent us from gathering and mourning together, a virtual vigil will be held on Friday at 7 p.m. through the Facebook group Colchester Supporting Our Community. It will be an opportunity for us to celebrate the life of these victims and to be there for their family and their loved ones. I hope that many of you will join with us on this occasion. As we seek to understand what happened yesterday, we must be there for each other. Since this tragedy, I have had discussions with Premier McNeil, the RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucky, the Minister of Public Safety Bill Blair, and our Nova Scotia caucus, among other people. We will continue to work together on this issue. I know that people have questions. The investigation is still underway, but I can assure you that the RCMP and local authorities will make you aware of the latest developments. I am also asking the media not to use the name or photos of the person behind these terrible actions. Let's not give him this gift. Let's focus instead on the victims and their loved ones.
By addressing all the kids in Nova Scotia and right across the country. I know the world can seem like a mean and ugly place right now, but there's a whole lot of good in the world too. You'll see it in your neighbors and in Canadians in the days and weeks and months ahead. This is a difficult time, and it can be a scary time too. But we're here for you, and we're going to get through this together. I promise.
Merci. On va commencer la conférence de presse avec le téléphone aujourd'hui. Modérateur, c'est à vous.
Thank you. Merci. First question, Laura Osmond, the Canadian Press. Line open.
Mr. Prime Minister, wanted to ask you, Conservative leader Andrew Scheer today accused you of being inflexible in your negotiations about the number of in-person sittings in Parliament. I was wondering if there's any room for a compromise, 2 sittings per week, for example, given that moving forward may be preferable to no deal at all.
Look, I don't want to get into arguments with anyone today. We are working together amongst all parties to try and figure out a way to both protect and uphold our democracy, to ensure that there is proper accountability, while at the same time doing that responsibly. And I am hopeful that we're going to be able to come to an appropriate arrangement.
Follow-up question.
I was wondering if we could have an accounting of all of the ways that the opposition has been kept informed of the ongoing crisis and the government's actions outside of the House to date.
As I said, we have been engaged with all parties over the course of this pandemic. There have been many good ideas brought forward by business leaders, by community groups, by individual Canadians, but also by MPs from all parties who've heard from citizens in their communities what's needed to be done to help. This has been an unprecedented effort across government to try and make sure that we are giving Canadians the help they need to get through this difficult time, and we will continue to do that.
Merci. Prochaine question. Opérateur.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Kate Bolongaro, Bloomberg. Line open.
Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. I have a question for you regarding navigating Canada through this crisis. Obviously, you're leading this G7 country through this pandemic, and you've also been personally impacted by this. So I'm wondering, how would you say that this pandemic has impacted your governing style as a leader and your perception of your role as our Prime Minister?
I think one of the things that we've seen right across the country is how Canadians have pulled together through this difficult time, and that's something that we've always done. We make sure we're there for each other when we encounter difficulties. And right across the country, whether it's premiers, whether it's municipal leaders, whether it's community groups or individual Canadians, we've seen Canadians step up for each other. And the privilege of being able to serve Canadians through this difficult time is really quite something when you see just how Canadians are resolute in their desire to support each other through this. Obviously, the capacity to work across all orders of government, work together as a country, is what is keeping us on a good path through this. There are too many tragedies to name going on as people lose loved ones right across the country. But at the same time, we know that what we are doing is helping prevent further tragedies, and we're going to continue to do that.
On a follow-up, Kate?
And how would you describe your strategy? What has it been in terms of inside the PMO office to getting us through these tough times? And how would you assess your own performance on that?
Our focus every step of the way has been listening to the best advice of experts and scientists on what we need to do to keep Canadians safe in this, and to ensure that everything we're doing is giving Canadians the comfort and confidence that we're all in this together and that we are going to be there for each other. I think that has been key to making sure that people are able to self-isolate, are able to take the difficult measures necessary to get us through this pandemic, is to know that as a country, as systems, as governments, we're there for each other, and making sure that Canadians feel that support and know that we're going to get through this together has been key in making us able to get through this together.
Merci. Opérateur, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Marie Vastel, Le Devoir. À vous.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I understand that you don't really want to talk about Parliament at this time, but I pretty much have to discuss this with you in spite of that. And I'd like to have you comment on your impression of what citizens are thinking, looking at what's happening in Ottawa now. People are at home and have been there for more than a month now. And we are seeing what's happening with this pandemic. And now Parliament is resuming in person because a number of political parties can't agree. What do you think citizens are thinking to themselves in seeing this today? Well, I think citizens understand that it is important, not because of the crisis or in spite of the crisis, but because of the crisis, that we continue to defend our institutions and sit as a parliament, but at the same time to find a way to do that responsibly. I think it's important to continue to have questions and to talk about the measures that will help Canadians, and we are proposing various ways of working together responsibly and constructively. Most of the parties agree, and I know that there will be further discussions today to try and figure out what the process should be and how we can defend our democratic principles and institutions, but responsibly. Follow up? There are some parties, well, one party, the Bloc Québécois, which is accusing the Conservatives of holding Parliament hostage. And I'd like to have you comment on that characterization of the current situation. And I'd also like to hear you comment on the idea of a compromise in the sense that there is one party demanding 3 in-person sittings per week. You don't agree, and if that you don't agree, there will be 5. That would seem to be worse, based on your current perspective, where you're saying now there should be almost none. Do you not think it would be better to negotiate and try to agree on 3 sittings rather than being stuck with 5? I do not want to get involved in any partisan bickering today. I don't think that's something that Canadians want to see. But Canadians do want to know that we are doing our job and defending our institutions and continuing to allow our Parliament to function in the midst of a crisis so that we're asking the right questions and getting the right answers. I'm very confident that today we will be able to agree on an approach that will ensure the continuity of our parliamentary institutions in this difficult time, but also be able to do that in a responsible way.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Louis-Samuel Perron, La Presse. À vous.
Oui. Oui, bonjour.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Will your government be introducing legislation to tighten up gun control, given what has just happened in Nova Scotia? Well, obviously, there are many, many questions now, and there is an investigation to be conducted as to what exactly happened in Nova Scotia. I don't want to draw any conclusions yet, but I would like to say that we made very clear commitments in terms of tightening up gun control. And we were at the point where we would have introduced legislation to ban assault weapons in this country, and we will bring forward those measures again as soon as we have an opportunity to do so, once we have come through COVID-19. Follow up? Yes, in Quebec this morning, construction workers have gone back to their construction sites. Now, is your government in support of this measure being taken in Quebec and across the country potentially? Well, I think that the various jurisdictions are making their own decisions within their field of jurisdiction, and I think it's up to each region and province to determine what can be done at what time. We are trying to coordinate these actions right across the country, but of course the decisions will be different from one place to the other. And of course, it is absolutely critical that whatever decisions are made, the health and safety of workers and all Canadians to avoid the further spread of COVID-19 must be the top priority if we're talking about any type of work starting up again.
CBC. You've promised a ban on assault-style weapons. Given what we know about the shooting in Nova Scotia, could that have prevented these crimes? And if not, would you consider even tighter gun control measures?
As we know, this is very much an ongoing investigation that's in its early stages in Nova Scotia right now, so I don't want to jump to conclusions or make characterizations about what happened until we get a full accounting from the authorities. But in regards to gun control, we took very serious commitments in the election campaign and have moved forward and are moving forward on them to ensure that we're strengthening gun control in this country. I can say that we were on the verge of introducing legislation to ban assault-style weapons across this country. It was interrupted when the pandemic caused Parliament to be suspended. But we have every intention of moving forward on that measure and potentially other measures when the Parliament returns.
Would you approve of relaxing some physical distancing measures to allow the people in Nova Scotia to bury their loved ones properly?
I think that's a reflection that communities, that the province, and that all of us are going to have. We understand how incredibly painful it is for families who've lost loved ones in Nova Scotia this past day, to imagine that they're not going to be able to see them off together as a community. But at the same time, there are thousands and thousands of Canadians across this country who've lost loved ones to COVID-19 over the past days, and others who've lost family members to cancer and to other causes, who haven't been able to gather, to mourn, to grieve, to attend funerals. This is something that we are dealing with right now that is heartbreak on top of other heartbreaks. And I know that everyone will be looking for ways to demonstrate their solidarity without putting further at risk communities, first responders, our health professionals, and our seniors. Okay.
I recognize that there are people who have lost loved ones in this past day or so in Nova Scotia, and there are also people who have lost family members and friends or parents in the recent weeks because of COVID-19, and they have been unable to come together for funerals or to mourn together. This is a difficult situation made even worse in times of loss and mourning. But we must continue to try to be there for each other in these tragic times and ensure that we are not creating greater risk for our loved ones, our neighbors, our first responders, or our healthcare workers. We need to do everything we can to keep people safe and healthy, even in the midst of this tragedy and pandemic.
Prime Minister, was the Nova Scotia shooter on the federal government's radar? Were any federal agencies watching him?
There are many questions that people are asking about what happened and how it happened, and that investigation is ongoing, and I can assure everyone that the RCMP will be sharing details as they can, as they choose in the coming days, and there will be many opportunities to talk more about these things once we have a clearer idea of the facts.
What did you think when you learned about the degree of planning and impersonation in this terrible crime? Does it concern you that someone could create such a good fake?
I think as we learn more about this, we'll have to ask ourselves many questions about how it happened and if and what we can do to keep communities safer in the future. But my first thoughts when I heard of this tragedy yesterday and saw the numbers climb in terms of victims, my first thought was for Nova Scotians who, for the most part, know each other so much. They are such a connected group that I know that the vast majority of Nova Scotians will have a direct link with one or more of the many victims. And the entire province and the entire country is grieving right now as we come to grips with something that is absolutely unimaginable.
Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. Prime Minister, as we're talking about the national tragedy in Nova Scotia and Canadians living under strict public health guidelines across the country, how appropriate is it for this ongoing battle over procedural matters to bring back Parliament? Why can't your government reach a deal on this?
I'm very hopeful that over the course of the day, Canadians will see parliamentarians coming together to demonstrate that our democracy is strong, that our institutions need to function, including during difficult times, indeed because of the difficult time we're going through, but that we can do so in a responsible way. As I've said, there is agreement amongst most of the parties in the House of Commons, and I hope to see by the end of this day that we're all in a place where we can both have our parliamentary institutions functioning, but doing so in a responsible way, given the context we're in.
I do hope that between now and the end of the day, we will have found a way of ensuring that our Parliament is functioning, that our democracy is healthy, not in spite of the pandemic, but because of the pandemic. But we will have to see. We do have the agreement of a number of parliamentarians, and we hope we will be able to find the right solution in order to continue to sit as a parliament responsibly, given the current circumstances.
What responsibility does your government take for not having this deal in place?
I think it's all of our collective responsibility to do the best we can through this difficult situation. It is really important for me that we continue to uphold our democracy, our democratic principles, the principles of accountability, the ability to move forward with new legislation to help Canadians. That really matters. But it really matters that we do so responsibly. I'm pleased that we have agreement amongst most parties. And I'm hopeful that by the end of the day today, we'll have a clear path forward that will both defend our institutions and appreciate the context that we're in right now.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Philippe Vincent Foisy de Radio-Canada.
Radio-Canada, good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I understand that there are questions that will be asked for many weeks to come about what happened in Nova Scotia, but my question is more about Canada in general. How is it that in 2020 we are still seeing mass shootings like this? Well, this is a tragic situation that reminds us that, unfortunately, there is still gun violence in this country. We have taken steps to try and strengthen gun control in Canada, but we must do more, and we have pledged to do more, and we will do more. We need to ensure that Canadians can live in safety in their communities, in their streets, and that's what we will continue to work on together. Now, will you be participating in that ceremony, and could you introduce your gun control bill in the coming weeks? Parliament will be sitting, so you could introduce it as early as this week. Yes, I intend to participate in the virtual vigil as much as possible, and we will most certainly be listening very carefully to what Canadians are saying with respect to more gun control. So we will look at what the options are when it comes to introducing that bill when the appropriate time is with us.
I have every intention of participating in the vigils virtually that I know many, many Canadians will be wanting to express their solidarity with the families in Nova Scotia who are grieving. And I am very much open to moving forward with our gun control legislation. I think there is always going to be questions about when is the right moment to do that. We are in the middle of a different crisis right now, but with Parliament returning in some fashion over the coming weeks, I think we will look at opportunities to do just that.
Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui m'a fait la conférence de presse aujourd'hui.
Merci tout le monde.
And that is the Prime Minister of Canada giving his daily briefing to the country on the pandemic. But today, a very different tone and a very different message, primarily about the shooting that he now confirms killed at least 18 people, not including the shooter in Nova Scotia. Let me bring in my colleagues, Vashi Kapelis and David Cochran. Vashi, over to you first.
Hey, Rosie. So on of course, the comments about what happened in Nova Scotia, a number of, different condolences offered by the Prime Minister. He said he was asked very, I thought, interestingly, if he was willing to relax any of the social distancing rules for people who obviously are going to find it so tough to be able to mourn all of this and grieve all of this from their homes rather than getting together. He talked about how difficult it is, but that it would make things worse from a public health standpoint, and that there will be a virtual memorial. He said he plans to take part in some of them to some effect. No specifics there, but it sounded like he would. I thought a couple of things that stood out for me on this subject were questions, first of all, around whether or not the suspect was on the federal government's radar or on federal agencies' radar. And he didn't, at this point, understandably, have an answer specifically about that. I don't know to what degree the suspect might have been, but I think that is a pertinent question, just given the severity of these actions. And I think, as we learn more about the motive and about what happened, those kinds of questions will persist. He was also asked sort of how he felt, what his reaction was upon learning that this suspect was almost obsessed with the RCMP, right? Had dressed up and taken cars and things like that. And he didn't really respond necessarily directly to that, but kept pointing out that there is a lot more to learn, and then put focus back on the victims, of course, where all of our thoughts are with today as well, and on the severity of the crimes. He was also asked, he was also asked about gun control legislation. Again, it's difficult to know because there are so few details about motive and about how this all unfolded at this point, whether or not any of that would have made a difference. But those questions are also interesting because the government had been promising gun control legislation for a number of months. My understanding, the last conversation I had about it was that something was expected this spring. They, of course, had been promising it right through the election campaign. They had done a consultation. I think it ended last April, so about a year ago. So there were calls for people who wanted more to bring that legislation in sooner. And I noticed that the Prime Minister said they still intend to, but once this whole pandemic thing is over. So that gives us some indication about when that might happen. But definitely a number of sort of policy-oriented questions and intelligence-related questions associated with what we've seen unfold in Nova Scotia. Not a lot of answers at this point because there are so few details at this point.
And also borrowing a page from the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Prime Minister Ardern, who a year ago, after the mass killing in Christchurch, where 50 people were killed in 2 mosques, called on media to do the same thing that the Prime Minister asked here, which was not say the name and not show the photo of the killer. David, over to you.
Rosie, what kind of struck me there with the Prime Minister is that for the second significant time in 2020, we've seen him leaning into the symbolism of his role as Prime Minister to offer comfort to people in a time of great tragedy. I mean, Iran, the Flight 752 was just over 100 days ago. And the stark difference between then and now is just how much COVID-19 is robbing people of the ability to go through rituals and milestones like wakes and funerals and even seek comfort with their loved ones because of the public health concerns. And sort of being asked about, can we relax those things to allow this to happen? And there's an acute focus, obviously, on what it is now 18 murders, because as the killer went door to door, the police today are going door to door and making terrible and horrible discoveries as they try to get the final tally of just what this horrific crime has cost the country. And so he pivoted to the point that it's not just now, it's people who are dying of cancer, people who are dying of heart disease, people who are dying of the ordinary run-of-the-mill things that we see killing Canadians in large numbers every year, and the total inability of families to find comfort and seek relief from their grief with their loved ones and through gatherings, and just how difficult that all is. It underscores all of this, and this is why when he's asked the political questions, he said, I don't want to be bickering or arguing with anyone today. And on that, it seems like there is going to be an agreement by the end of the day for the House of Commons to sit in person just once a week, supplement that by virtual sittings as that becomes possible. Because even on fundamental issues of life and death, nothing is working as it should right now because of this, and everything from Parliament on down has to find ways to adapt.
Okay, thank you both very much. I will come back to you if I have time. For now, though, I want to go to Lenore Zan. She's the MP for Cumberland-Colchester, where Portapique is located, and she joins us from Truro, Nova Scotia. Lenore, my condolences to everyone in your riding and the community.
Thank you so much, Rosie. I really appreciate that.
How are you? Yeah, it's been a hard couple of days, and we're all living in such a strange time anyway. What can you tell me about, about how you found out about what was unfolding in Portapique, I guess, late Saturday?
Actually, I didn't hear anything about it until yesterday morning. The government did give me a call to let me know that there was an active shooter and that I should let my constituents know. So I immediately went to Twitter and retweeted some of the stuff that the RCMP were saying, because at that point in time, he was apparently still on the loose, and we were telling people to make sure to lock their doors, and if they saw a gentleman with his description, not to go anywhere near him, that he was armed and dangerous. Not quite the type of thing you would expect to wake up to on a Sunday morning. In the middle of a sleepy little town, in the middle of COVID-19 shutdown, where everybody's in their homes anyway. But, it rapidly evolved. And within a short amount of time, maybe an hour and a half, I found out that he had indeed been apprehended. And then shortly after that, we heard that he was deceased.
Tell us a little bit about some of those communities. We were talking to Brett Ruskin, but Portapique is sort of cottage country, and these are small towns where people would know each other, I would imagine.
Oh, yes. I mean, we all, as the Prime Minister said, we all know each other here. So whether you actually live in Portapique or Debert or Shubenacadie, we are all related. There are cousins and sisters and brothers and husbands and wives, and so many of us know people who are definitely involved, and their family members have been affected. Many people were looking for loved ones yesterday, putting up their pictures and saying, have you seen them? They live in Portapique. I can't get a hold of them. Or Wentworth, too, is another area. Mm-hmm. And sadly, today I found out that a number of those folks that they'd been looking for are deceased.
Yeah, start out some of the names and the stories of the people that were killed are starting to emerge today. We heard the Prime Minister say there, Lenore, that now it's up to 18 people who were killed. I mean, how do you react to that, knowing that these are your people in some ways?
I mean, obviously it's really heartbreaking, and people are in shock. We're still in shock right now.
Sure.
And some people are starting to mourn, but the mourning is going to go on for some time, I believe, as the shock waves keep growing and more people realize who was killed, and basically senselessly. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people are also saying we do not want to become known as, the place where the biggest killing ever took place in Canada, mass killing. We don't want to become known as that. We're a beautiful, quiet, peaceful little part of the world, and everybody is really, very warm and kind and caring, and we would prefer to be known and remembered as that rather than some place where this horrific thing has happened.
You spoke to the Prime Minister yesterday, I think, and what was he able to say to you that was helpful, or to the community that they need to know?
Basically, he was very, very compassionate, very kind, very understanding, wanting to know if there's anything that I need, understanding how difficult this is to go through, making sure that I knew that if our community needs anything, the government will be there. And then today he came on the phone with all of us, with the entire Nova Scotian Liberal caucus, and basically said the same thing. And it's just nice to have a leader that's compassionate and kind and understanding, and who takes the time to do these things with his members and anybody else who's been affected. So I know my community appreciates it, and we appreciate the outpouring of love from across Canada, to be honest. We're very moved by that.
We only have identified a number of the victims, so if there's some that we haven't, maybe we won't get into names, but do you personally know any of the 18 people who lost their lives?
I don't know all of the names myself yet, but I do know I know who some of them are, and I have friends who are friends of those people. I also, I also have friends who knew the gunman, who contacted me and said they're in a state of shock because they went to school with him. They'd known him since he was 16. Mm-hmm. He was such a nice guy. They talked to him all the time. He seemed to be fine. Another friend said that the gentleman drove into his brother's yard in a car on Sunday, and they had a few words, and he seemed normal, and drove off and said he was having a drive. So, as the RCMP said, this is an ongoing investigation, and because there are so many places where the crimes took place, it's going to be very interesting. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, trying to pull all those pieces together. It's going to be very interesting, but it's heartbreaking for us here on the ground.
You heard the Prime Minister get the question about whether physical distancing should be relaxed for some of the families involved in this. And I understand completely that everyone across the country, there have been more than 1,600 deaths related to COVID, and then of course deaths due to other illness and other accidents. And all those people are having to do funerals and memorials without being in attendance. But I wonder if, because of the violence and the magnitude of this incident, whether you think there should be some ability for people to, in some safe way, come together to feel things together as a community.
Well, I think for one thing that would be up to the Premier of Nova Scotia, I would imagine. But the thing is, I wouldn't want to go to a funeral thinking that perhaps I might spread a disease that's a killer to somebody else and have more deaths because of my involvement, So I think we have to think of the bigger picture of all of us and protecting all Nova Scotians and all Canadians. That's why we are doing what we're doing and sacrificing our lives and jobs and everything by staying home. So there are going to be vigils. There are going to be online vigils, and I know there is one on Friday night at 7:00 on Facebook that community supporting, Colchester supporting our community is the name of that Facebook page, and that's a community-led vigil. So I'm going to take part in that, and that's what I would do.
Do you recognize how difficult this is because of the fact that we're in the pandemic, even for yourself personally, the fact that we're so disconnected from people?
I definitely do. Although we're all on Facebook, we're not a Twitterverse here in Cumberland, Colchester. I think most of us are of an age where we prefer Facebook. And so we are actually reaching out and talking to each other, and a number of friends have posted things where they're just brokenhearted because it's their family members and they can't go and see them. So, yeah.
All right. Okay, Lenore Zann, thank you for making the time. Nova Scotia Liberal MP Lenore Zann, and of course, again, we're all thinking about you. That's for sure. We're all thinking about your riding.
Thank you very much from Nova Scotia. We love you. Thank you.
And stay healthy, of course. All right. That's right. That leads us to the end of our coverage today of the federal government's briefing on COVID-19. We are not going to bring you the federal briefing with ministers and public health officials today because of the ongoing situation in Nova Scotia. You can watch that briefing online. And actually, provinces, many of them are delaying some of their press conferences because the RCMP's next update on what unfolded over the past couple of days, day and a half in Nova Scotia will take place at 1 o'clock Eastern. Bill Blair, the Minister of Public Safety, is expected to speak to the media at 1:30 Eastern. And of course, we do know that there will be updates from provinces, Ontario, Quebec, and others on the ongoing state of the pandemic, COVID-19. That is our coverage today here on CBC. CBC News Network will continue with our coverage. I'm Rosemary Barton.
Hello, everyone. I'm Suhana Marchand. This is CBC News Network. A province and a nation in shock and grief after one of the deadliest mass killings in our country's history. At least 18 people are dead in Nova Scotia. Police are investigating multiple crime scenes, including the small community of Portapique on the Bay of Fundy, where it all began. Just moments ago, the Prime Minister paid